Welcome to the second mini lecture for chapter 15. We're going to pick up right where we left off with annuals, biennials, and perennials. So let's look at annual weeds. So just like in the plant production world, annual just completes their life cycle in one season, one growing season. These type of weeds really can invade crop production systems, and we see that in really all levels of field crop production. They really have a high level of seed production, so that's why they're able to really invade fields. And unfortunately, there are a couple of ways that we can protect our crops by managing these annual weeds. We do that by either an herbicide or the way we till up those weeds, the way we till up the field. And a lot of people don't realize this, but there are actually two different types of weeds that we grow. Weeds that grow, not we grow. There are summer annuals, and then there are winter annuals. And so those summer annuals will germinate during the growing season, obviously of the summer months, and those affect a lot of crops, but mainly corn and soybeans are the worst that they will affect. And pigweed is my arch nemesis. I hate pigweed, but fortunately it is pretty easy to eradicate from a field. And then we have the winter weeds, and we'll look at some shepherd's purses and some chickweed in class this week. So here's my arch nemesis on the left-hand side. This is red root pigweed. This will grow pretty much everywhere, and it thrives in very hot weather. And so this is a huge pest to farmers. And that was on the left. On the right, you see that yellow foxtail. You're probably a little bit more familiar with this if you're not from a farm background, because it grows very aquatically and in hot weather. So those foxtails you can see a lot of different places. All right, biennial weed. So again, that takes 2 growing seasons to complete its life cycle, and the vegetation will take place within the first year of that growing season, and then it will flower the second year. And if it flowers the second year, it's going to be pretty persistent within those fields or pastures. And you best see those really on waterways and roadsides. Those biennial weeds are easy to spot there, just because once they flower, they're going to be able to grow back, produce a new seed, and then grow back again. We can really take care of those biennial weeds by tillage if you're in a tillage farming system. Now, if you're no-till, there's some ways you can get around that, and we'll talk about that as well. Thistles are the worst biennial weed because, once that flower happens, and then it's going to start to enact more of those thistles to grow that second year. So that can take a long time to take care of that in a field, and it's one that can really hurt those yields as well. Perennial weeds, so those live 3 years or more, 5 years, 10 years, and if they're not taken care of. Those perennial weeds they have a very specialized reproductive system that will allow them to live throughout the winter. So it's not going to be hard for them to partake in how, either how harsh or how light our winters are. The only really big way that we can take care of these on a large scale is herbicides. And so if you are an organic grower, that presents a little bit of a problem, because if you're organic, you can't use conventional herbicide to take care of those as well. And they do suffer from defoliation by tillage, so that is a good management process, but they will still grow back. Maybe not to the intensity that it was the year before, but it still can grow back. So here are some examples of perennial weeds and structures. So Johnson grass and Bermuda grass, you can see those grass stolons and rhizome there. We see some creeping root systems like the Canadian thistle, the Canada thistle, that wild garlic bulb. We're starting to see that a lot more, and that takes a little bit more management to take care of. So here are Canadian thistle and a dandelion. I'm sure you remember back in your younger days blowing those the dead dandelions all over the yard, and an adult would yell at you because you were spreading weeds around. And I have to do that to Grace a lot. We have to talk about weed control in our own yard, and she's only 2. So in the Canadian thistle, you more see that in pastures. So now let's look at grasses versus broadleaf weeds. So grasses and broadleafs are very similar to the way we classify plants. So the way we classify field plants, grasses have a monocot, broadleaves have a dicot. So there's 1 cotyledon in grasses and 2 cotyledons in broadleaves. Grasses have simple leaves, and broadleaves can have simple leaves, or they can have compound leaves. Really the thing that differentiates the two in terms of growing is that broadleaf will, during that germination period, the seed will emerge from below ground for most of those broadleafs, and then the seed will then germinate for grasses, and it will remain below ground while that leaf emerges from the seed. So kind of 2 different ways of emergence and germination. So how do weeds affect us in agriculture? We've talked about yield and how that is really important because it will compete for water, nutrients, light, but it also has a pretty significant cost of increase of production, and so you're going to have to spread more herbicide because of those weeds, maybe more fertilizer. They can be parasitic, and they can be toxic, and so those are not good. They can also devalue a crop. So if you have any sort of weed in, let's say, a wheat field, and once you harvest it, if that goes into the hopper of the combine, then goes into the semi, taking that to the co-op or wherever you're selling it, they will dock you because there are other types of seeds or weeds in your crop, so they'll actually dock you for that. So here's this is in your book, but this is a good graph to show you the crop yield versus the weed numbers. So the more the weed numbers get, the lower your crop yield will then go. So human health issues that we can see, we all know what poison ivy can do to us because of physical contact. Ragweed is also really important. A lot of people are allergic to ragweed. So when that ragweed is up, a lot of allergies, problems start to come up, sinus issues will start to come up. And then indirectly, so if you directly from ingestion, if you were to eat some of these weeds that we'll talk about in class, you can actually get extremely sick and maybe die from them as well. So here's an example of a white snake root. White snake roots are not fun to deal with, and unfortunately some people don't notice them if they're in a pasture. And so if we have something, livestock or humans eat them, can get them extremely sick, and some of them that you can actually die from it too. You'll start to have a lot of muscle weakness, and then your liver will start to fail. And it can happen pretty quickly, but fortunately we see it, and it's been eradicated from many parts of the United States.